Welcome, listeners, to this Speaking from Our Hearts podcast episode, where I'm joined today by Paul Luftenegger. And Paul is and I'm going to read my notes here. Paul is an international, Canadian, multi-award winning singer-songwriter and composer, inspiring and promoting global love and kindness through a portfolio of positive, conscious songs. Wow, Paul, warm welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I'm so grateful to be here.
Okay, so where do we start with that intro? Okay, so tell us a bit about yourself, Paul. Let's have a nice sort of gentle foray into the conversation and find out a bit about you. So tell us.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to anyone that's tuning in to this for coming. I always like to thank everyone that sort of takes time. So thank you for taking time if you're listening to this. I send you love, peace, joy, happiness, and prosperity. So the long story short, sort of about me, I'll just share that I'm 42 years old. I think that's a good starting off point. So I've been around long enough to know a few things, but I'm still learning lots. And I think, you know, what I learn more as I get older is that there's lots to learn in life. And I think that when you learn, or when you're open to being a student to life, I think it opens up so many opportunities to experience the gamut of what it means to truly be human. So if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you're likely coming to this because you're seeking something, which means you're actually a student. So I think we're all students together. So I like to just start off with the fact that we're all equals. I've been through quite a bit in my life. I'm gay. I like to always sort of say that I had to take off that first mask in my youth, which prepared me to take off many more masks in my life. Being gay was much easier than taking off the mask of being spiritual for me. And, I've always been that kid, even now, where I was interested in the psychic spectrum or the medium spectrum. And I've always felt called to service with God or source, the universe, whatever word you use. But I've always been with God from the time I can remember. And I sort of repressed this when I was a child a lot because I was confused by it, being Catholic. But what's sort of interesting is in basically 2011, my father sadly took his own life. And it put me into a tailspin of having to sort of lean on God like I've never had to. And ultimately, I was 34 years old when that happened. And my life sort of blew up. And I could no longer be who I used to be. It was like I actually had died in many ways because I had to rebirth myself into, I think, just a new space. And kind of the interesting part of all of this is that I was in music pretty much my whole life. And I was sort of that kid that everybody noticed could sing. I sang for the Pope when I was 15 into 16 years old. I had a lot of musical sort of lifetime space when I was a kid. And I sort of repressed that the older I got because I didn't think I could have a career making music and making money, as I was told and programmed for many people. Not my parents, but the world. So that being said, I sort of believed that I couldn't be a musician and have, money essentially. So I went down the corporate path. I worked for Hewlett Packard. I worked for call centers. I did emergency roadside services as a manager for pretty much every major car company. And when my father died, I just couldn't do any of that anymore. And I started doing music for the first time publicly in 2011. And I was called by God to do this. So that's really sort of, the overview, very quick overview of a lot of stuff that went on in my life. But in 2011, I sort of started this new part of me, which is essentially being an international singer and songwriter. And I write music to inspire global love and kindness from within. And, I've sang for the UN 3 times. And, I won't go on with all of that, but it's, I have definitely, something's happening in the world with my music. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What age, Paul, was you aware of this? Probably at that age, I don't know if talent was the right word at that age, but this inspiration, this feeling inside, this way of being of you and this relationship with music. What
Yeah, it sort of happened really for as long as I can remember. So my granny, who took care of me in this little pocket of time when I was a kid, and it's really interesting because we have a lot of grandchildren in our family, and for exactly when I was born, it was this little tiny spot where my granny was around to take care of
Mm,
me, and she was a singer. And I believe everything's in divine order. There's no mistake that this happened for me at that time. And she always knew I was a singer. So she just started singing with me and playing the piano with me, the organ. And I just fell in love with music. I loved it. I loved how it lit people up when she sang. And the thing that's sort of interesting when I look back at it, I could never be who I am without my mother or her, who
mm.
basically brought music into my life at a really young age. So our whole sort of side of my mom's side, all the sisters used to always sing together with their mother in, in 4 and 5 part harmonies. And it was just a really beautiful, I had really strong women singers in my life. And it was sort of a cool, I grew up in the late 70s and the 80s, and it was a beautiful time on the earth where I think, it was a very different world than today. But
Mm.
I'm so grateful for sort of the musical sort of nourishment that I had.
70s. I've just made a note of that, Paul. I'm right. Okay, 70s music. Let's have a little bit of a dive into that because
Yeah.
I mean I was born in 1960, so I'm a little bit older. So 60s. I can remember. It's interesting what you're saying around the kind of matriarchal influence there, Paul, because I was brought up by my grandmother and my mother.
Hmm.
Um, Never really had any positive role models in my life, but I can remember them saying to me at a very early age, particularly my grandmother, Paul, one day you will be a famous footballer or a famous music man. She used to call it music man. And well, okay, I've ended up neither, but this time, let's the clock's still sort of ticking away.
Yeah.
Um, but I can remember, Paul, at the age of 3, 1963 to be precise,
Hmm.
Millie singing My Boy Lollipop.
Wow.
And it just took over me.
Right.
And that's my earliest memory of this thing called music. And I was it Wayne Dyer that says, "Don't die with your music still inside you."
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you brought that up because that's a really important part of, I think music has been really misunderstood. And I feel
Mm,
sort of like I'm an ambassador
yeah.
to get us back on track with some of this stuff, actually, for the divine.
Yeah.
So, I think what you share there, Paul, is perfect because we need to become responsible as a world for also making sure that we support musicians and music.
Yeah.
And I love Britain in particular. I've lived in London, England. And what I love about London that I really noticed is that the arts are supported very differently than in most of the other parts of the world. And I love that Britain in particular, British people honor the arts in a very different way than I think anywhere else I've ever been, actually. And I think it's important to sort of remember that we have to realize the power of music uniting people together.
Mm,
And I think, from a perspective of just even financial, if you look at the music industry, when Apple Music sort of came out, what's interesting about music is that really the cost or the price of music to purchase it has gone down to almost to the point of it being pathetic. And I
mm,
think, we need to become responsible consumers of what, you know, for a long time people used to just steal music.
yeah.
And I say this with respect because, I've been, I use some of those services too. So I don't want to sort of point any fingers, but I
Mm,
do, being on this side of music and seeing pennies come in at times for what people listen to, and oftentimes people saying that they can't afford an album. I can't count how many times I've been told that.
mm,
Well, what I can't imagine is a world without music or musicians to lift the spirit of humanity up. And I think we as a community need to start being accountable for where we spend our money. And I think music's one of those things where we need to make sure that we A, keep it in the schools, and B, make sure that we support artists and especially new artists so that we keep the industry of music thriving like never before, because it's the one thing that actually is a very unique energy to bring people together in peace. And it has no borders, it has no lines that divide. It is actually something that unites. And it uses the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. There's so much study happening about this. And I say this, you know, you opened sort of a little nerve for me when you shared that. So thank you. And it gave me an opportunity to share just sort of my belief on why you had that feeling when you were a kid. And I think we remember that kids need us as, you know, adults and parents to make sure we introduce, you know, music that has some actual, you know, value in the lyrics, in the content, and also to the musician singing. And I think we have really, you know, at times we have sort of some singers that are sort of not doing a very good job of being leaders for the future. So no names, but, you know, to be conscious of what you introduce your children to in music.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
From your earliest recollections, Paul, who were the most influential musicians in your life? Obviously, as somebody growing up that has got this feeling, this expression, this love, call it what you will, this whole thing bubbling inside. But who really kind of, if there was one or many, who were those influences?
Well, I love this question, and it's really interesting. I've done a lot of interviews since I started doing this work, and not a lot of people ask me this, which I love this question. So for me, I first of all love all kinds of music. I love classical for various reasons. I'm a piano player, so I grew up with classical piano. So I love Bach, Beethoven. I love Beethoven with all my heart. Probably my favorite pianist that way. In music, in terms of, you know, more into the modern world, let's call it, I loved growing up with the Beatles. I think actually John Lennon and his work is without question some of the most important questions asked in music. Do I think he was a perfect, you know, guy? No, I don't, but no one is. But as a musician, I really do honor his consciousness in music, especially the latter part when he left the Beatles with Yoko Ono.
Yeah.
I also love, you know, I love the big bands. Like I love Coldplay with all my heart. I love U2 so much. And I love some country as well. And I think just, you know, a balancing out of all styles is so important. So I also love, you know, as I've gotten older, I love jazz a lot just because it offers sort of that sort of ad hoc kind of playing, just, you know, without sort of the structure, without it being, you know, grid-like. And I love, the other thing too is I love Black musicians. I grew up also with the thing that I was obsessed with as a kid was We Are the World. I was obsessed with, you know, basically Celine Dion. I loved, the other person that I loved was Whitney Houston as a kid. I loved, there's so many from that sort of timeline. Leonard Cohen's amazing, you know, so many, too many to mention. I love all of it.
Leonard Cohen, very acquired taste, but yeah, I share that focus, Paul. When you were speaking there was a couple of things that flashed through my mind around when you was talking about the Beatles, and one particular lyric, "Money can't buy you love, can't buy me love," and that amalgamated to one of my favorite all times is when Shirley Bassey sings, "This is my life. I have such a lot of love. I want to give. Let me live. Let me live." And what she's saying is like, whatever's gone in the past, who really gives a damn? Because I'm here, and I'm here to love. And I just think there's this whole kind of contrast and dichotomy, Paul, between what the world sees as money and this kind of, I call them silver trinkets out there. You know, you've got to have stuff, and this contrasting inner world of, no, you haven't. You've got to have art.
Yeah.
And I kind of use those two examples, Paul, just picking up on your thread there of this whole movement, this love revolution now that I believe is sweeping this earth. There's a radical, the winds of, to quote Bob Dylan, the winds of change, they are a-blowing.
Yeah, that's a darn good quote to use right now for the times that we're in. And they are blowing strong. And the thing that I think is sort of interesting is I don't think a lot of people actually realize what's going on, actually. And it's sort of interesting. I think right now there's actually two worlds going on. There's the conscious world, which is, you know, people that are aware of, you know, what they're doing, taking responsibility for it, you know, in the communities that we sort of circle, the new age more so communities. But there's also this unconscious world still that's, we call it 3D in our world and 5D sometimes. I don't know if you've heard those terms.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because what's happening, that sweep of wind coming in, that love evolution or revolution. I like the word evolution because we're evolving. And I think what's happening is humanity is growing up and starting to take some responsibility for what we're creating and co-creating. So I love that you said that because it's darn true in my world. And when you seek into the conscious world, there's so much blooming right now, and it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. One of the dialogues I have, well, more consistently than ever now, Paul, is, obviously through Speaking from Our Hearts podcast, I'm in contact with so many amazing people around the globe, and invariably, that C word consciousness gets raised, and some of the people on the depth and the level, you talk about the level 5, for example, and those shares, and what I'm sort of on a submission, because there is a bit far bigger mission, but one of the submissions, I believe, Paul, is to take that power of consciousness and the benefits thereof, and I'm particularly influenced by Rupert Spirane's non-duality philosophy, but take that out onto the streets where it's dark.
Yeah, that's a good.
And communicate with words and a language that people understand, not an elevated, fluffy, or what's perceived to be fluffy. And I use, other people's words, not mine. I paraphrase there, because that power needs to be taken out onto the streets to shed some light on that darkness.
Yeah, and it's a confusing thing to sort of figure out how to, I think, most effectively help others. So I think really where we're at is it really comes back to community grassroots, those basic community sort of opportunities, let's call them, to expand or amplify, I think just ultimately non-confrontational, I think ultimately respect. And this is why when I started, sharing today, like, being gay, it's very interesting because, I've had every kind of experience dealing with, I've been literally kicked out of a country where my husband's from, to the point of them now accepting me legally as a spouse. So it's very interesting to see sort of in my lifetime where I've seen things go, we're in a time of great change from a human rights perspective alone. So I think accessing what we've learned and making sure that, we do action and service, service to others is really where we actually end up serving ourselves. This is what I've learned in my life, one of the big things. So I think what you're sharing is really just where we always think that we can't really affect change. And if I can I've been invited to the UN 3 times. If I can get invited to the UN, I can guarantee you, we can certainly do things that, like, I never thought that was really going to ever happen for me, truthfully. And, it's interesting because once you start sort of helping others start helping you.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing that you're talking about. And we all need to sort of become a little bit more aware that we can actually go and help people. And if you help one person, I remember when I started doing what I do, I thought, if I help one person not take their own life, I've helped enough that it matters. That, if I save one life because of what I do, that's great. And I can guarantee you, with the letters and messages I've received sharing my story publicly and openly about my father's suicide, I know that I've helped, I couldn't count the many, many, many thousands of people now. And I think this is what you're talking about. So through service is how we do what you're talking about. And I think I'd like to inspire anyone to just sort of, brush off the past and go and help somebody else that needs a little something. And it doesn't always have to be money. It can be, it can be just to listen is to love. And I think, the basic human sort of things that we forget about, sometimes even just someone that's old in an elderly care facility, just listening to someone share because they're lonely is a beautiful gift that you can give someone. So those are the kinds of things that I think are really scalable.
Yeah, interesting. Paul, listening to you mention suicide, that was something that I'd like to share this as well with you, that 13 and a half, because of the barbaric, grotesque, and I'm being polite there for the sensitivity of the listeners, treatment of my stepfather that I actually come very close to. And my awareness of service, to use your word, became apparent. I mean, I couldn't intellectualize it, I couldn't rationalize it because I was a child in years, and certainly emotionally, my head was screwed completely by this barbaric behaviour that I'd been on the end of, which turned me to drink at a very early age. It turned me to violence at a very early age, and that was my life. But what I've understood, and so I can tell the story at the cold face of life, up dark alleyways where, things happen.
Yeah.
Because I've got scars over my body to prove it.
Right.
But it's a question of choice, Paul, isn't it? And the power to say to people, and I don't think it's oversimplifying it to say, look, guys, you've got a choice between fear and love.
Yeah, it's always that. It's always the root of everything.
Yeah. I mean, I know in the UK at the moment there's horrific knife crime between amongst young people, youngsters losing their life daily. And I understand that because that was very much the culture I was, that fear, get in first, win at all costs, lash out further and ask questions later, and all this kind of craziness. It was all born out of fear. And I like what you referred to, Paul, if we can just go back a bit about the mask at the top of this conversation. When you introduced us to the early parts of your journey, and you gave two scenarios, one around your sexuality and the other one around your spirituality. And I'd like to come to the second one of the spirituality, if I can, please, because and it's only my personal view, but I'm interested in your thoughts around this. I've got a partner, I've been with her 10 years, beautiful soul, but we openly discuss that our most intimate relationship is with our source.
Yeah.
That is because without that, we're just shallow sort of human beings, if you will.
100%. And so you bringing this into focus again, which I love this conversation, and I'm very, very well with my soul to talk about this, because I think that we need to be mature enough to start talking about some of the things that go on the inside. Yeah. So this is the real shift here. And, if you dig into the spiritual movement that's going on, there's this thing that until you sort of go through something that's pretty real, you don't really have an understanding of what life stems from. And the reality is that I remember watching this yogi actually throw a ball into an audience from a stage, and one person caught it in their hand, and he asked, where did you experience catching the ball? And the person in the audience was, well, in my hand. And he's like, well, yes, but where did you feel it? Where did you experience it? Or where was it? Where was the sensation? And the person was like, well, on my fingertips and in my, and then he said, well, yes, but where did you actually feel and catch the ball from? How did you know to catch it? And the answer was like, well, I guess it came kind of from the inside. And so this is sort of the big thing in the world that I think hasn't really been taught to us very well, is that we live life actually on the inside. And until you sort of realize that, you really can't understand source all that well. And I think, to those that sort of go, oh, I'm an atheist, or, and all the power to you, what you believe, it's cool, I'm well with it. But at the end of the day, if you think you're alone in this infinite space, I don't know how you can look at endless stars and sky and think that there's not a conscious intelligence that's sort of part of all of it. I don't think that it's a domination force at all. I think it's a beautiful opportunity source where we can become one with that energy that sustains our life. And I think the spiritual maturity that we have to have is realize that we're not large enough or big enough to do this life alone. And until you sort of deal with that, you really have a misunderstanding of what's going on, because there's an energy that flows through the core of us. Yeah. And I think what I've realized in my life is I've had to learn that myself, and I needed to do that after my dad died, because I was broken and very hurt, in a way that I've never sustained a blow like that in my life. And I knew I couldn't do it alone anymore. And I needed to lean on God. And I didn't actually care about the world for the first time in my life. I used to live in great fear. And it was a survival moment where I had to sort of literally let go of the world and just be with God. And I was actually, and I still am, but it's been 8 years since then. And it's very interesting because when somebody dies and you go through trauma, something happens. And there's this sort of angelic space that happens that I never anticipated is there. And you can tap into it from the inside. And I think what's interesting is I thought that when, my father would die or my mother would die, that the relationship would just be over. But I forgot in my silly human mind that the relationship carries on and becomes spiritual. Mm-hmm. And my father and I have a very spiritual relationship now that I never thought would be an option. And I couldn't think of it this way before I knew. So the soul goes on, and there's still a telepathy, if you will, that can happen between us once someone leaves the physical body. And it's very interesting to me because that part of life has to come from the inside. And that's part of source as well. I say God, but source, everything's returning to its source. And this is the part that's very cool. Just like a water drop in an ocean, it came from the ocean and it's always seeking to go back to the big pool. So I look at God sort of that way. And the reality is it's a co-creative world and universe. So we're co-creating with the divine.
Absolutely. I share that 100%.
Yeah.
Loving conscious music, Paul, what does that term mean? Loving
conscious music. Well, first of all, I think intention. So I have a team on the other side. I'll just share this. So with God as well. And so loving conscious music is really about intention. So one of the things that I've been shown and very much realize for sure is that everything and anything starts with intention. And if you don't know what an intention is behind something, I used to laugh at people that would talk about this stuff because I was like, oh, I just didn't get it. But intention is 10/10 of the law. So without intention, if you make or create or do anything, you're not really understanding actually what you're doing. And you have to understand your intention from your heart and your soul behind it. So if you're going to do something, you have to know the intention. And my intention is very clear. It's to write conscious music. I would never write, sing, or put any energy out that's negative, ever. And everything that I do comes with that intention, which is conscious. So I say it because I think I didn't have a term for what I knew I wanted to create, which was music that is conscious to help the soul feel its worth and to have the opportunity and the support to thrive at life. So when I write music, I write conscious music from the first person to support the soul within the listener. And this is a very different thing because I don't think musicians have languaging for that. But that's actually what a good musician actually typically does. And I think, words have power. I know this to be very true. Thoughts have power. And what's very cool about music is what I've done. It's very cool because I wouldn't know you without my music. Truth. And I also wouldn't know thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And the only people that sort of like my music are pretty much conscious people. And what's really cool about that is we start to do something that's pretty darn cool and new. And we get to have conscious conversations. And this bloom is never ending. And I guarantee you, if you tap in, if you were to reach some of the people that have actually used my music, I guarantee you I've helped them. And that was the intention because it was consciously done to help their soul thrive more than before they knew my music. So that's what conscious music is to me.
Excellent. I just want to challenge something there, Paul. When you said without music, I mean, yes, we have come through obviously your music, but without that, we don't actually know whether our paths would have crossed, whether we, this thing called coincidence, or somebody reminded me recently, coincidence.
Hmm.
Our paths might have crossed, they might not. We don't know. We just don't know
That's
that.
true. That said, though, I can guarantee you where I would be if I wasn't doing music is it wouldn't have been in Spain with you, and there might have been an opportunity to cross paths another way. But I have this thing where I personally feel in the divine design, and I don't feel like I'm really from this earth. Let's just say this. So I wouldn't be doing anything but music. So it was meant to be at that moment. And, for those that are listening that might not know this, we met in Spain, in
Yeah.
Elche, and I was invited to sing for a second time for essentially a heart coherent sort of audience, which are all leaders in sort of the New Age sort of movements. And they're spiritual sort of leaders, if you will. So I love that you challenged me on it, and I love a good challenge, but I don't know. I don't think that I really don't know how I would have met you, but you never know.
Maybe, Paul, maybe, and this might be a bit of self-flattery, it might be the ego starting to flirt with me now, but
Okay.
maybe my grandmother's words to me when I was, nearly 60 years ago about me being a footballer or a musician, it could have been that, we were destined to be on stage together. But hold
Yeah,
that thought. That's another time, another place.
yeah, fair enough. And that being said, it's very possible we've shared a past life together too, somewhere other than here at this moment in time too. So anything's possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to come in, Paul, if I can, around your new work, Seeds of Peace.
Yes.
And yeah, tell us about the inspiration for Seeds of Peace.
Yeah, sure. So when my father died, what is really interesting about my life is that I basically I'm a psychic and I'm clairaudient. Okay, so this is what I would say. So these are the two parts of me that I didn't understand before my dad died, really, truthfully, at all. And so what's sort of fascinating is after my dad died, I started to have clairaudience very clearly with the divine, with source, and also with other souls that are not incarnated. And I've always had this in my life. I just sort of shut it down. And I've always had sort of that inner voice telling me certain things that are very specific. So one of the messages that came through to me is that I will never have peace in my life until I find peace within.
Yeah,
Period. This message was very clear. And I remember being very confused and uncertain of how to achieve that. So that was the message at the beginning after my dad died. And I was very lost, probably on the edge of my own suicide, if I'm really honest, because I just thought if I couldn't heal, then I just couldn't do this anymore. And I remember telling God, I don't know if I can continue being alive. I just felt so broken to the point of actually just not knowing if I would ever be okay again is really the truth. And what's sort of interesting about the Seeds of Peace is that I've written 7 albums. This is my 7th. And I knew this year at the United Nations for the 3rd invitation I've had, it was to basically sing for the International Day of Peace on the 70th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. And it's very interesting to me because I was singing at the UN chapel, and I remember this thing started happening within me that I knew that I would write a peace project album. And I didn't really know what that looked like. And I was sort of tired and burnt out from music still at this point. So I was like, oh, I don't think I have another album in me. That was sort of how I felt. And then I went to India to meet Daddy Janki, and I was invited to meet a leader that's 103 years old, and she leads the Brahma Kumari. And my music invited me there. I was invited because of my music to meet her on Mount Tabu at the headquarters of the Brahma Kumari. They have 9,000 centers around the world. And they're very different. They use technology and the idea of treating people like they're angels, which I sort of like that idea. And I think we're an angel once we decide to be. So I went and I realized on Mount Tabu that I would do this album. And it's sort of one of the longest sort of germination sort of albums I've done. And while I was there, this woman that I met who uses my music in a San Diego hospital to help heart transplant patients that are babies. She uses my music in the hospital, and she sort of pushed me to do this. And I listened. And I think what's really cool about what happens when you start following your divine design with your soul and your heart in full alignment is the world shows you what you need at times. And she knew I needed this push, and she pushed me enough that I did it. And I wouldn't have done it without her actual pushing me, I don't think. So Seeds of Peace is really about finding the inner peace within the listener. And it's an opportunity, and it opens up a question of really, I think the most important question that there is, do you feel peaceful inside? And, for me, for the first time in my life, where I thought I would never finish my music catalog, I finished my music catalog with this album. It's my 7th, and I'm at peace with music. So I know I will no longer die with my music still inside of me, like that question.
Mm.
And it's very cool because I wasn't sure if this would happen for me at 33 and 34 years old. I thought it was over. I thought my music days were maybe over. And then I had this surprise sort of experience that sort of happened. And this album is really a container of inner peace that I know is really cool because many of the people that funded it, which I think there's a huge power to that, the money that came to pay for this album was actually from my music and people that support it. So their energy is in it as well, their soul, their heart, their spirit. And that's very peaceful because they're some of the best people I know on the planet. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. Thank you. Do you have a bucket list?
Oh, so what was that?
A bucket list. You have a bucket
list. Yes. Well, I've been living my bucket list since 2011. No one is promised tomorrow on Earth. So I sort of realized that the day my father died. And the truth is, in my bucket list, I've done a lot of the things that I had visions of as a child. I just actually got back from the pyramids. I went to see the pyramids. I put this album literally on the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And I've been to India. The thing that I feel, some of the things that I haven't done, I haven't been on Oprah Winfrey's show. And I say this with great humility. The only thing I really want to do that's probably of that vein right now is I really want to thank her for helping me in 2011 with the OWN network, and in particular, her masterclass. So my biggest, top thing on my bucket list is to just thank her in person. And I really hope that that happens. I've sort of been putting this out there for quite a while, and I know so many people that know her intimately and personally more and more. And it's funny because I haven't had the chance yet, but that's probably my biggest bucket list one right now.
Yet being the operative word.
Yet.
Yet. Okay. As we draw towards a close, Paul, if you had just one, and I know you've got many, I've kind of just had this label, and I don't deal in labels. I've got this thing against labels because labels are for jars, not people.
Right.
I've come up with a label. I'm kind of breaking my own rule there, and it's like, oh, this guy's a musical messenger. And so on that messenger, if you had a note, Paul, if you had one big message above all else to deliver to the world, what would it be?
Well, I think that the biggest message is really coming into focus more and more, and it's really I think to remember to stop being so hard on ourselves. And I think that most people are really, 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 in my experience, are really, really, really hard on themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really easy to pretend that we don't do that. But I think more and more as I travel this sort of world and meet a lot of people and listen, I like to listen to people. I think a lot of people suffer and don't really share who they really are, and they
Mm.
hide behind masks that are very, very, very thick. So I would say the most important message is actually to realize that in your heart is where you will find the most beautiful things that exist for you. And I think if you're really honest with yourself, you have to have that conversation and say, I love myself. And until you are willing to sort of show up and maybe start to heal some of the wounds in your heart, because we've all been wounded here on earth, it's been pretty traumatic.
Mm.
It's a human sort of trauma to be a human being. And it's very hard to be a human being. And I think we need to start really being honest about the fact that we have been programmed by our conscious and our subconscious mind of the status quo of the past. And I think until we sort of stop that process and just go within ourselves to our heart and actually just love ourselves from that space forward, sort of draw the line in the sand and realize that I will make a commitment to love myself and to go from my head into my heart and to live from my heart. And when it asks something of me, to do it. Because if you don't, every single time you're adding a mask to cover yourself. And I think, I've learned this process for the last 8 years, but it's really easy with a mantra to become love, expanding love. All your heart does, like a compass, is it knows to love.
Mm.
And if you're not in that space, I love Rumi's quote. Let's just use this one. So stop, close your eyes, fall in love, and stay there. And it's really a beautiful one. So I think that's probably the messenger message that I would share about, I think, just what I've learned. And I think once we stop being so hard on ourselves and actually, in many ways, self-hatred, if you
Mm.
really want to call it something, I think we actually start to bloom an opportunity for a better future for us of the experiences that we can have. And when you look at everything as energy, it helps us understand that there's really like those two things, the fear and the love. They're like gas pedals.
Yeah.
Whatever you're going to press is going to go out in an energy. So peace, love, joy, happiness, prosperity is a love-based root. And you put it out as energy. So it has to come from the inside to the outside world. And whatever you put out as energy, it's going to come back to us.
Yeah.
So if you're going to put out fear, which is hatred, hostility, etc., blah, 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 you're going to put that out. And I guarantee you it will come back. So we need to become very conscious of the energy we create and become responsible creators. And when you put out love vibrationally, energetically, it does definitely create the life and the experiences that we're going to have. So I know you because I put out love. That's the truth.
Yeah.
If I put out hatred, I probably wouldn't know you. And I really like having this conversation. So I think that's the sort of thing that I think we need to really become clean on. So that's why you go into the heart.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Interesting contrast there, Paul. And a very simple one. The very first podcast that went out was Mastering Life is as simple as ABC. And
Yeah,
I agree. And it is, because I think life is a very simple game.
it
We
is.
complicate it. Our ego steps in and creates havoc and this fear and all that stuff. But that's another time, another place.
Yep.
So I want to ask a really, really another big question, because that was a big question, I believe, and certainly a personal one, Paul. But I want to ask this: what does speaking from your heart mean to you?
Mm. Well, I can safely say that I've had so many teachers that have taught me so many things. And I think for me, there's really something so beautiful in the genius of the simplicity of life when you finally get it, is that, ultimately, you either are a vessel of the divine or you're not. And I think until you sort of become a vessel of the good vibrations or the conscious vibrations, I don't really know how to be anything else now. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, because I trip and fall on fear. Like, that's what being human's about sometimes. But if I fall, I get up a lot easier now, because I can look in the mirror and go, you know what, I like myself. I'm very proud of what I've done in a very humble way,
Yeah.
because I know that I'm no longer by myself. And I can guarantee you, it's very funny. I used to be scared of family sort of not being in my life, I had to keep good family relationships, no matter even how bad they were to me at times, these family members and extended family. But what it's really interesting now is if anything ever happened to anyone in my life where I needed some help, I have people literally all around the world that I could call. And the only reason why I know those people, that are good people, by the way, is because my heart has actually loved them. And I think, from my heart, nothing comes into this lifetime. And I really ultimately believe in the win-win relationship. So my heart really just wishes for everyone to know that they have the right to thrive and to honor that part of you that is divine, and that vessel of you. You are a vessel of love. And I think, I believe that we are actually angels that sort of forgot. That's really how I feel about human beings. I think we forgot that we are angels. And I think when we start looking at that sort of idea, I think we realize that it's a choice to be good. So choose it. Choose to become the vessel of the good vibrations, because that's what actually the world needs, first of all. But what's the best part about that is that you will actually see the reflection back that you have loved. And that for me is really something that I've taken full accountability for my heart that way. So everything that I do, I don't do anything without my heart being really in the picture or in the energy. Yeah.
I think it's fair to say, Paul, that you've planted a lot of seeds of peace during this podcast conversation. So, certainly from my own point of view, and I absolutely know that this will be reverberated. This energy will be reverberated through the listeners. So, sincere gratitude to you.
Yeah. And I have to share my shirt because I had this as a gift, but it's 100% human.
Yeah.
I just had to show you.
We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah. So how can people get in touch with you, reach out to you, Paul, find out more about you? What's your contact details?
Yeah, so it's really simple. So I believe in pollinating love and kindness. So my name is long. So everybody always asks, how do you say Paul Luften, blah, blah, blah. So, but it's Paul Luftenegger. So you can go to paulluftenegger.com or look me up on Google, or you can go to a much simpler email address, which is www.bekindness.com. So BEE kindness.com. And that's where I'll be.
As ever, listeners, those contact details will be in the show notes. And I think it's time to sign off now. And I'll certainly be reflecting on this, what I believe has been a beautiful conversation. And I think all that remains now to be said is, whatever you do, always walk your path with heart.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Paul. Lots of love to everyone listening.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.